Now, David Eby, Drea, you're in British Columbia. Do you want to take the lead on what his comments have been recently?
Sure. And I know this is out of order, but I think we should start with the video of what he says and then, read the articles about what that looks like for him. So can we just go to the clip and then we'll comment?
It's moments like these where you have a choice. You can surrender and give up, or you can stand up. And for British Columbia, we're going to stand up. We're going to respond to tariffs. And keep in mind, this is not a fight that we wanted. It's not a fight that we picked. And in fact, we think this is going to hurt Americans as badly as it does Canadians. But we're going to stand up. We're going to support federal efforts to respond with targeted tariffs to make sure that the Americans understand that we will not surrender.
Okay, first of all, no, it's not going to hurt the Americans as bad if it hurts the Canadians. But what is he talking about surrendering? You touched on it a little bit when you talked about our fentanyl issue, but let's talk about what do they call fentanyl capital of the world? We've been nicknamed out here in Vancouver as far as cities go. That's what he doesn't want to surrender. That's what he doesn't want to give up on these borders. We've had in 2023, we had in BC alone, 2,500 fatal overdoses. Out of all the overdoses in Canada, of course, British Columbia has the most. We have more than Quebec and Ontario, even though they have more people. We had a third of all of the overdoses. He should have already, the fight was already here when it comes to what's happening with the border, what's happening to British Columbians. And we all know it's not just the people who are struggling with these addiction issues. It's everybody that's connected with them. And it's also the healthcare system. Even after COVID, when they were blocking off all of the rooms for ICU and no one was coming in, who was actually putting pressure on the system? It's the people overdosing in British Columbia. That's what was happening. It skyrocketed 58% here. So this is what he says we have to take a stand in keeping. It's sick, it's disgusting, it's twisted, and he should be embarrassed that another world leader is seeing what's happening here and having to put this pressure or this threat, America first, but also we're the neighbors. We're right next door in BC to the US.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And that's what I was getting at before when I was stating that instead of just actually putting Canadians' wants and needs first and tending to these issues that we have been highlighting for the last few years and calling on the government to take action to counter them. No, now all of a sudden it's because of Trump that it's been brought into, the mainstream media's news cycle and onto the radar of the elected officials. And yet, instead of actually addressing those issues and just, hey, let's actually clean up our borders, let's get the fentanyl off of our streets, no, we're going to counter with threats and tariffs right back at you. It is textbook bizarro upside down world that we're living in. And again, with our parliament being completely prorogued and at a standstill. That's if the Supreme Court will decide February 13th and 14th. There's been a motion to immediately reverse the prorogation of parliament by a lawyer and another individual. I would have to go back into the case file, but a judge has decided to expedite this hearing to the filing of this motion to end the prorogation of Parliament. And so we may see Parliament come back sooner than I think it was March 25th is when Trudeau originally prorogued it until, which he gives new leadership until March the 9th to, campaign and decide for the Liberal Party. So that timing will be very interesting to see if we'll actually head into an election right there after that judge makes his or her ruling. And see what happens with the prorogation, because I think the timing couldn't be worse for us in Canada.
It couldn't.
With these tariffs. It's absolutely absurd that we don't have a functioning parliament at this time. And David Eby's not helping.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, the threat is February 1st. What is that, like 8 or 9 days or something like that? That's ridiculous. So this is Premier David Eby's vision of how we take a stand in letting the fentanyl freely flow. So one thing that he's suggesting to Canadians as a whole, not just British Columbians, is to carefully think about spending money. Essentially, he wants us to boycott together the US and things like that. He says British Columbians should rethink trips to the United States, so don't take vacations there, and purchasing of American products as the province establishes a task force to respond to the US President Donald Trump's threatened tariffs. And if you scroll down, there's a quote from him. Oh, I got a pop up here. Let's just get rid of that. So he says, it feels very strange to say, but I really do think that for Canadians right now, when you're planning your March break vacations, when you're planning your summer vacations, if the tariff threat is realized, the deliberate economic attack on families in our province, in our country, by the President of the United States, that we really should think carefully about spending our money in that country. So yeah, he goes on to basically encourage this boycott of happening again, instead of just trying to work with actually making British Columbia and Canada a better place as a whole. I hope for British Columbians at home, when you're at the grocery store and you have a chance to buy a product, right now you're looking carefully at the labels to support Canadian jobs and support Canada at this critical time. Now, here's the thing. That's the message we should always be saying. Like, why don't we say that to people? Why don't we support Canadian businesses as a whole anyways? But to say it now in defense of this, when the side issue is these tariffs are actually coming, we actually need to work to do what we should have done before, is just ludicrous.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that any Canadian who is checking labels and looking to see where their products are made will find that most of them come from China.
Yeah.
And so it's very difficult to buy Canadian made products when the vast majority of our manufacturing is outsourced to China, which is another thing that Trump signed an executive order to rein in. He wants to bring back manufacturing to the United States so that they no longer depend so heavily on foreign exports. And I think that will lend into this tariff and trade war thing, because actually it's not going to hit the US as hard as we think it will, because they're trying to bring their manufacturing back home to the United States. And so naturally that means that they will no longer rely so heavily on those external exports and other countries for their goods and services. And I mean, I don't know about you, but our dollar is absolutely abysmal compared to the United States dollar. I think last I checked, it was trading at like 70, 77 or 78 cents per dollar. And so that prevents a lot of Canadians from spending their money in the United States as it is, not to mention that we have people who are struggling to pay their bills and get by and heat their homes and feed their families. And there's record numbers visiting food banks, and the homelessness crisis is out of control. So I don't know what kind of fantasy la la land people like David Eby live in, where they think that the vast majority of people can even afford to go to anywhere for a March break vacation or head somewhere else to spend their money when they don't get, the same a dollar amount for their dollars. So this just seems kind of like silly thing to even rely on, because it's not factoring in all of those other variables that lend to the fact that Canadians just simply can't afford this, and it's not going to impact the United States in the way that I think they think it will.
No. And I want to invite everybody who's listening. Again, you can go to Rumble, do a Rumble rant, and weigh into things. It helps us be able to tell the news, but it also makes you part of the show. And I want to ask you guys, what do you think? Is this a bluff from Trump? Some people are still wondering. He's just saying this to get as much as he can in line, and then maybe he'll give us more time, or maybe he'll backpedal, or whatever. Me know what you think about that. The other thing, just briefly to mention, that Premier Eby is saying is that he possibly wants to stop buying U.S. alcohol in response to the tariffs as well. And that would be in the government liquor stores, which means it's still available in the the other options, which is interesting. I mean, when he says, we're going to fight back and it's going to hurt the Americans just as bad, it's like, yeah, no, this isn't going to hurt them this bad. But the other thing that doesn't make sense is you've already paid for the alcohol. Like, You already bought it. So what do you mean you're going to stop the sale of it? What happens with that money? Where is it going? Is that going to be part of the new safer supply? Are we going to just start handing it out for free? I don't know. So
Yeah, it's funny because that was Ontario Premier Doug Ford took the exact same
right.
stance, saying they were going to pull U.S. Was it I think it was bourbon specifically off the shelves,
Yeah.
and or maybe I'm confusing that with when we threatened the same to Russia in 2022. But anyway, that seems to be where Doug Ford is trying to go, also with his counter threats, wearing
Yeah.
his Canada is not for sale trucker hat, which makes him look, I think, even more silly than he does as a progressive conservative. But I think we have another clip here of John Rustad,
Yeah.
the leader of the opposition in BC, who has asked Eby to rein in his comments.
Hi, John Rustad here with the Conservative Party of British Columbia, and on a beautiful sunny day here in Vancouver. Tomorrow, Monday, is the day that President Trump takes over. There is the threats of the tariffs that are going to be happening between the United States and Canada, in particular British Columbia. We have a government, both federally and now provincially with David Eby, that are threatening to expand this trade war. The results of that would be absolutely devastating. We need to be doing everything we can to try to work with the Americans, to try to make sure we protect our borders, stop the flow of fentanyl into this province, deal with our port issues, not creating a trade war. The damage that'll be done, tens of thousands of jobs could be lost, the amount of revenue that would be lost as a province, but most importantly, the damage this would do to our resource sectors, to all of the sectors that are doing trade with the United States is just immeasurable. I was just at the Natural Resource Forum in Prince George, the truck loggers here in Vancouver. I'm now attending the mining conference here in Vancouver this week. And I can tell you, all of those sectors are extremely worried about what is to come. David Eby is putting at risk the people in this province by threatening a trade war instead of actually figuring out how you work with the Americans. Ontario, Saskatchewan, and even I think Alberta are looking at how they work with the Americans, not ramping up the trade rhetoric. I fear that David Eby is doing this so that he can blame the Americans for the troubles that we have. He can blame the Americans for his debt and irresponsible spending. He can blame the Americans for the downturn that is coming in our resource sectors. This is wrong. He is throwing people under the bus simply for politics. Do what's right. Let's make sure that we protect our borders, make sure that we stop this flow of fentanyl that's killing people in this province, and actually get down to work with having a relationship with our largest trading partner, with our greatest ally, and figure out how can we grow our economy and help people in this province as opposed to just playing politics. This is what we need to change, this is what we need to do, and this is what the Conservative Party stands for.
There you have some more reasonable comments by the Conservative Party in British Columbia that surely will be spun somehow, or have been already spun somehow in the mainstream media to be radical, alt-right or far-right, for simply trying to be diplomatic and expressing some diplomacy about how is best to proceed. It's crazy.
Not just the media, of course, the NDP too. I mean, we do have a socialist government. I just quickly shared a tweet from Ravi Kalan, an NDP MLA. And so his response to Rustad's video is, John Rustad and his Conservatives need to take off their Make America Great Again hats and put on Team Canada jerseys like the rest of us Canadians. I think most Canadians, voting Canadians, do not want to go in any type of war with the U.S. I don't think this is a winning strategy for them as they think it is.
No, not especially given that our military is exceptionally weak at this time.
Yes. Oh
we have not met our NATO target in years, nearly a decade, if memory serves. And we have, focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion hires rather than hiring people based on merit. Our equipment is old, it's rusty, it's broken down. We've sent most of it over to the Ukraine. So we're really not prepared to have escalating tensions with a country that continues to meet its NATO targets and has just announced that they are bringing back all of their military and service members that were fired over the vaccine mandates, which I think was, a substantial percentage of the force. And so, yeah, I agree that diplomacy and being able to negotiate instead of escalate and counter threaten is the way to go here.
Oh, hi, it's Ezra Levant here in Toronto with an important message because we need your help. Independent journalism in Canada is under attack. Government censors, big tech deplatformers, and the dying legacy media are all working together to maintain exclusive control on the information you receive. They don't want you to hear other voices like ours, and they really don't want you to be informed and to think for yourself. That's why the work we do here at Rebel News is so important. Our on-the-ground reporting, independent news shows, and special content you won't find anywhere else. It's all designed to give you trustworthy information and alternative viewpoints so you can decide for yourself. We don't get government money, and we are not owned by some big global conglomerate. We're funded by people just like you, so please support independent journalism and help us continue our work by subscribing and becoming a Rebel News Plus member today, right here on the page